Donald Trump stepped forward and called for $350 billion in Canadian uranium. It wasn't framed as a request, nor presented through diplomatic channels, nor shaped by the quiet felly, classified negotiations that typically govern nuclear agreements between allies. It was a public demand, delivered with the assumption that Canada would comply, simply because the United States expected it to. 4. Yet this came after a year and a half, during which Canada had steadily dismantled every piece of leverage Washington once held. Canada's reply did not follow the usual script. There was no diplomacy, no measured tone, no calculated counterattack like before. It was something colder. Mark Carney didn't just reject the demand, he disclosed that fulfilling it was no longer possible. The uranium in question had already been sold. Over the previous 6 months, Canada had quietly secured long-term supply agreements with France, Japan, South Korea, India, the United Kingdom, and the European Atomic Energy Community. Nearly all export capacity had been committed to buyers who negotiated respectfully, paid market rates, and never issued threats. By the time Trump made his demand, the uranium was already allocated, processed, and effectively out of reach of any American pressure. He hadn't entered a negotiation. He had stepped into a void. Warren Buffett later described it as the most sophisticated strategic maneuver he had seen from any government leader. He reframed the entire confrontation with a striking observation. Carney didn't win when he refused the demand. He won months earlier when he signed the contracts that made refusal inevitable. The most dangerous opponent, Ford Buffett explained, is not the one who fights openly, but the one who allows you to act while quietly eliminating every option you will need later. To grasp the gravity of this moment, it's necessary to understand what was demanded. The proposal, effectively a demand backed by threats of sanctions, called for a 25-year uranium supply deal worth around $350 billion. It would grant the United States priority access to uranium from Saskatchewan's Athabasca Basin, home to the world's richest deposits, largely operated by Cameco Corporation. The terms required Canada to sell at 12% below market value, justified by the White House as compensation for America's security role through NATO and NORAD. The language was striking. It framed Canadian resources as an obligation, as though they inherently belonged to the United States. It implied that alliance membership came with discounted access to nuclear fuel. It treated Canada not as a partner, but as a supplier expected to comply. The added threat of sanctions against other buyers was equivalent to warning every customer in the market to stand aside. What made this demand so reckless was a reality few Americans fully appreciate. The United States imports 93% of its uranium. Domestic production has declined for decades. Mines are aging, deposits are lower quality, regulations slow development, and the workforce has diminished. Meanwhile, Canada remains the largest single supplier. Unlike other resources, uranium has no substitute. Nuclear reactors cannot switch fuels. They rely on enriched uranium, and if supply is disrupted, reactors run until existing fuel is exhausted, typically 18 to 24 months, before shutting down entirely. That shutdown removes 20% of the nation's electricity from the grid, with no immediate replacement. The implications extend beyond energy. The U.S. nuclear arsenal and naval propulsion systems depend on uranium supply chains linked to the same infrastructure. Disruption threatens not just power generation, but military readiness and strategic deterrence itself. Against this backdrop, the demand revealed a fundamental misunderstanding. Uranium is not a commodity like oil or copper. It is a cornerstone of both modern energy and national security. Carney's response came during a press conference in Ottawa. There was no spectacle, no dramatic staging, no political theater. He stood alone, composed, delivering facts with quiet precision. His demeanor reflected not reaction, but resolution. He began calmly, stating that Canada had reviewed the proposal and could not fulfill it, not out of refusal, but because the uranium was no longer available. Then he explained the contracts signed over the previous 6 months, agreements with major global partners that committed Canada's supply for decades. Then came the moment that would echo worldwide. Looking directly into the camera, Carney said, without raising his voice, "You're not early, you're not late, you're irrelevant." The word carried weight. It wasn't rejection. It was dismissal. It implied the demand no longer mattered, that the decision had already been made elsewhere. The United States hadn't been denied a seat, it had arrived after the table was cleared. 4. The reaction was immediate. Within minutes, those words circulated globally. Within hours, analysts were assessing the implications for energy security and geopolitical balance. 4. Intelligence experts described it as a major strategic surprise. Governments confirmed their contracts, each announcement closing another path for American access. The demand itself exposed America's vulnerability. 5. It signaled desperation. Global producers recognized the leverage and adjusted accordingly. Prices rose sharply, and the cost fell on American utilities and consumers. 6. The attempt to secure supply instead made it more expensive everywhere. Looking back over the 18 months leading to this moment, a pattern emerged. Each Canadian move, energy restrictions, export controls, trade diversification, was not merely reactive, it was preparation. Carney wasn't responding in real time. He was building toward a specific outcome. Every agreement, every policy shift. 4. Every diplomatic engagement formed part of a larger strategy. By the time the uranium demand came, the outcome was already locked in. The refusal was not a decision, it was the only possible result. Warren Buffett captured the principle clearly. Negotiations are rarely won at the table, they are won beforehand. The side that prepares, that secures alternatives and removes dependency, holds the advantage. 5. The side that arrives needing the deal has already lost. Carney had spent months ensuring Canada could walk away without consequence. The United States, by contrast, needed the agreement. 5. That imbalance defined the outcome before the conversation even began. The consequences unfolded quickly. Emergency meetings were held, contingency plans drafted, and alternative supplies sought at higher costs. Markets reacted, prices surged, and vulnerabilities became visible. Political divisions blurred as leaders across the spectrum recognized the stakes. At its core, this was not simply a dispute over trade or energy. It was a demonstration of strategy. 4. One side relied on pressure and demands. The other quietly reshaped reality until those demands no longer mattered. Trump believed he was initiating a negotiation. Carney had concluded it months earlier. And in the end, 9 words captured the entire shift in power. Not loud, not dramatic, but precise and final. You're not early. You're not late. You're irrelevant.